Hey everyone, what we're going to be doing is the welder square, or what some people call a speed square or even a rafting square. Either way, for this project it's called the welder square. If you do a really good job on this project, if everything is really tight to tolerance, if everything is really good on measurement, you could use this tool in your later assignments. So just to kind of start, you're going to be given a blueprint. And not all of you will know how to read a blueprint right off the bat, but that's okay. Generally, what a blueprint is you've got a series of images and measurements and then some other details in there that are going to help you put together a project. Just about anything you can think of out in industry has a blueprint, sometimes many blueprints. We won't really get into what every single line, arrow, number, box, all that stuff, what it means on a blueprint. We'll be getting to that later, but I do want to familiarize you all with the blueprint, so that's why everything we're going to be doing, well, mostly everything is going to have a blueprint, and then as we progress in the course, you'll start figuring out what the different elements mean. For now, just concentrate on the pictures and the measurements that are given. So this is a three-dimensional picture of what your speed square is going to look like, or excuse me, what your welder square is going to look like when it's all put together. So the very first place you're going to start is with your material. So this is a little bit bigger than the stuff you're actually going to be getting, and by bigger I mean like actually wider. Alright, so you can see one end is right here, the other end is right here. So typically I would be wearing my gloves, but I'm going to be handling this very gently just for purpose of the video. But for you, if you want to wear gloves while you're laying out your project, by all means go ahead and do so. You're going to have this length of metal. You're going to be given one piece of material in order to make this project. So that means we're going to have to make some cuts. We're going to have to take this one big piece, cut it down into smaller pieces in order to make this. So the very first thing you're going to want to do is look at the measurements, okay? So typically where I'd start is I would start with the horizontal and the vertical legs, because those are the biggest parts. And right here, you can't really see on the video, but when you have your blueprint sitting in front of you, you're going to be able to see that this is telling us that this has to be 7 inches long. And so the vertical and the horizontal leg are the same length, so we know that both pieces have to be 7 inches long. So the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to take a tape measure, or you're going to take some other tool to measure with. It can be any tool, doesn't really matter, your preference, I guess. And measure from one end, doesn't matter which end, you're going to find 7 inches and you're going to mark it, okay? So if you don't have another square to use, just move a little bit up your material, place a second dot there, because we're going to connect those two dots, and this is going to be where our first cut is. So this is going to be piece number 1. So if you had another square you can use, what you could do is use the square to get that nice straight edge, and then you would draw your line just like that using just one dot, or you can use 2 dots just for safe. Now typically here is where I would stop and make my first cut, because depending on the process that you're using to cut this, we don't know how wide our cut is going to be. We don't know how much material we're going to be losing. So if you're using, say, a cutting torch, if you're using a bandsaw, a grinder with a cutting wheel, all sorts of different methods to cut the material, we don't know how much we're losing, so we don't know exactly where to start measuring the next 7 inches. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and stop, and I'm going to get the piece cut. Alright, so what I've done is I've placed the metal on the chop saw, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the chop saw blade up on the outside of this line, or the left side in this case, because I want to cut it pretty close to 7 inches, and if I cut directly on the line, I'm actually going to be removing a little bit more material than what I'd like, so it'll be under 7 inches. And once I've lined up this blade enough times, double check, triple check, I'm going to go ahead and clamp it in place, which I'm going to do right now. I'm going to get my working gloves on because the chop saw does create a lot of sparks and metal debris, and it's also very loud. Alright, I'm going to give it one last check. And like I was saying, it's very loud, so you're probably going to want to wear some type of ear protection. This method actually cuts the material very slowly depending on the shape of the material, but I wanted to go ahead and demonstrate this so that way you know what options you have in order to cut your pieces. I'm actually going to use a different method to cut this out. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm putting the strip of material into a vise, so that way I don't have to try holding this piece with my hands when I try to cut it with a grinder. Alright, so these vices can be found in the grinding area or the fabrication area of our shop, way in the back. These vices do rotate, so make sure that they are locked in place, so that way they're not moving around on you when you're cutting your material. And of course, make sure that you've got a face shield on if you're cutting or grinding anything back in those grinding stations. I've taken a regular angle grinder that you're going to see me pick up here shortly, and I've taken the grinding wheel off, and I have outfitted it using a cutting disc. And so that's what we're going to be using to cutting material if we ever need to use an angle grinder. And so I've switched the view really quick, and I'm actually going to show you what the cutting disc looks like. So it looks pretty similar to a grinding disc, but it's very thin. Here's the grinding disc, so it's a lot thicker. That's made to remove metal versus cutting metal. And here's one thing that you have to worry about that I'm going to demonstrate here shortly is the rotation of the disc. So it spins clockwise, and that's something that we have to be aware of when we're making our cuts. I'm going to show you here shortly. I'm going to make my first cut, and pay attention to which direction the sparks tend to fly. So no matter if I'm cutting away from me or towards me, those sparks are traveling towards me because of the way that I am using the grinder, the direction that the disc is spinning. So this is how you can change the placement of the shield, so that way you can kind of flip the grinder around and use it in a different position. So it's just opening the clamp, moving that shield around, clamping it back down, and in this case I'm going to have to remove the handle because it's going to get in the way. So now pay attention to which direction the sparks are flying. So now they're traveling away from us. Doesn't matter if I'm cutting towards me or if I'm cutting away from me. So this is going to make all the difference if you're making a cut and being able to see the line that you're cutting along. So make sure that how you're cutting the project allows you maximum visibility of what you're doing. And you can see it doesn't really take that long to cut the material. You can look at the cut. If you look closely, you can kind of see it's got a sharp edge. I'm pointing it out right now, so we need to be careful if we're handling this without gloves. Alright, so now we've got our first piece cut. Alright, so you got to remember which side you made the cut on, because right now my piece is cool, your piece might still be a little bit warm, so if you still need to wear your gloves, go for it. So now, instead of just taking this piece and, let's say, lay it right up against that other piece and then just kind of drawing a line straight across, we need to make sure that this is actually 7 inches. So this is where I like to use another square. That way I can just set it right up against the edge, follow this down, and if you look at that, I am just a smidge over 7 inches. So in this case, sure, you can go ahead, see where you need to do your second line, but in case you were a little short, you were a little over, you need to actually use an actual measuring tool to make sure that you're getting the correct length on your second cut. So let's go ahead and mark out another 7 inches. Alright, we've got our second piece. Let's go and cut it. Alright, and so right here I am demonstrating using one of our bandsaws to cut our strip. So I am just going to lay the strip in there. I'm going to line the blade up with the line that we're going to be cutting. Alright, so again, in this instance, I am cutting on the left side of the line or the outside of the line. So I'm just making sure that the blade lines up. Then I'm going to go ahead, clamp this material in place. Okay, then I'm going to line it up one more time just to double check that I've got it right. And then I can go ahead and switch it on and let it start cutting. Alright, so I'm showing you how to turn the bandsaw on. There's this little silvery nub sort of toggle switch that you're going to flip down, and then you're going to lower the bandsaw onto the piece that you're cutting very slowly by hand, and you're actually going to see the bandsaw kind of bounce up and down. And so what that means is the blade that's currently on here is missing some teeth in a few areas, and it's letting us know that, hey, you need to replace the blade right now, because if we keep using it, we're going to continue to damage the blade, and that's just taking risks that, for potential damage that we just don't want. So I'm going to use another method. All right, so now I've got piece number 1 and piece number 2 cut out. So now, remember we verified that piece number 1 was 7 inches long. We're going to have to do the same thing with piece number 2. So again, the easiest way to do that is to take our square or to take another ruler. You can even do this with a tape measure. Make sure that you find a flat side for the piece just in case you've got a burr like I do. So I'm flipping it around to get a straight edge, fitting it into my square, and would you look at that, right at 7 inches. So on this cut I was a little more lucky than I was on number 1. Remember, my pieces are a lot wider than what you're going to have, and if we take a look at the blueprint, our pieces are actually supposed to be 1 inch thick. So here I kind of pointed out they're supposed to be 1 inch thick. Mine are way thicker than that. So I'm gonna take my square and see just how wide they are, and it looks like 2 inches and 7/8. So 2 7/8 inches. So what I'm gonna have to do, I'm gonna have to do some extra work and measure out 1 inch strips on both of them, and I'm gonna have to cut those out. And if you're wondering, well, why didn't I do this in the first place before just cutting out the individual pieces? Our vices don't open up that big or don't open up that much. So it would be a little awkward to try to fit these into the vise and cut out these strips. So I'm just taking the path of least resistance here. But either way, it's extra work that I'm going to have to do. So let me go ahead and do that really quick. Alright, so I went ahead and I cut my pieces down. So now I've got one and I've got two pieces that are 1 inch wide. And we've got my final piece here that I'm going to have to cut two more pieces out of. So we've got this flat piece right here that's going to be sitting on one side of the combination square, or sorry, speed square. And we've got this other piece right in here that connects to both of the legs. So this can be called many different things. A lot of people call that the rib. They call that, the wedge. They call that the throat. Whatever you want to call it, there's this piece that connects to both legs. But before we get into measuring for these two pieces, I want you to take a look right here. Notice how both legs aren't completely square. All right, there is this cut. There's this angled cut to both of them. So if we think of this as a 90-degree angle, all right, and this seems to just go right in half. What do you think half of 90 is? 45. So this is a 45-degree angle or a 45-degree cut. So what we need to do, and this works if you works better if you have a combination square. A combination square will actually give you a nice, easy 45-degree cut. But if you don't have access to one, here's one method to use. So we know that these pieces are 1 inch in width. So what you need to do is take a ruler and just line it up across your piece. And since they're 1 inch in width, we need to measure 1 inch down. So right here at the 1. All right. Now I'm going to do it again on this side. So right there. Now I'm going to draw a line to connect the two. All right, so since this is the first piece, it doesn't really matter which way I angle my cut. So because this is 1 inch in width, and now we've measured 1 inch down, theoretically, this is a square, a nice, we won't say perfect, but we'll say it's a pretty good square. So all you have to do is draw a line from one corner to the opposite corner, or you can go from this corner to that opposite corner. It doesn't matter which one you're doing because this is our first piece. So I'm going to go ahead, get that drawn out. Draw a little X just to make sure that I know that this is the piece that we're going to be cutting. So now I want to actually lay it out as if I'm following that picture. So this is going to be the first leg. Okay, so now we take our second one, and where do you think we're going to have to make that cut? So kind of pretend that they're overlapping. Okay, so if they're overlapping, where do you think that cut's got to go? All right, if you were kind of imagining a line that looks like this, well, you're correct. All right, and if you had your line going the other way, well, you're going to have to do some flip-flopping around in order to try to get your pieces to fit up correctly. So before I actually count this line, you can go ahead and rub that off. I want to actually go through, measure 1 inch down, create my square, and then draw my line. I'm going to go ahead, measure 1 inch. The other side. Measure 1 inch. Now I'm going to connect the two. Again, I'm going to lay out my first leg, take your second one. Alright, visualize where that piece is going to go, and then you can go ahead, draw your line from corner to corner, and remember, draw an X so that way we know which piece to get rid of. So same thing, you can use pretty much any method you want to cut these. The easiest method is probably going to be using an angle grinder with a cutting disc. Alright, so I've got my pieces cut at a 45-degree angle. I've also cleaned them up using a bench grinder just to take off those sharp edges, and that's going to help with fit up. And this is where we start checking for squareness. So once these pieces are put up against each other, they should make a 90-degree angle or right angle. And we need to use another square. We can use two just to be safe, but one works fine. And so we're going to check to make sure that when they're fit together, they make that 90-degree angle. And so you can see I've got a bit of a gap in mine. So I need to do a little bit more grinding in order to improve the fit up. Alright, so now I've kind of grinded down my little 45-degree cuts a little bit. And you can see that my gap isn't quite as big. So I feel comfortable enough to weld this up and not have it, change shapes and warp on me or anything like that. So this is just another check to make sure that my fit up is going to be okay. When we're looking at the blueprint, remember we need this extra piece that is going to be the flat side, or we can call that the foot of our welder square. So I went ahead and I cut that piece out already. So this is going to be 1 inch thick by 7 inches long. And so if I place that up against the square nice and gently so I don't move everything, so you can see that that's spot on 7 inches. And if I take this ruler, so it's just a hair over 7, nothing that some more grinding can't do. So you can see one of my edges is still a little rusty, so I can still do a little bit more work on that. And then this is the piece that I've cut out. So now I've done all the math already, so I know how long I need to cut this, and this is 1 inch in width. So this is going to be the piece that connects between the two legs. So if I get my spacing just right here, there we go. So it's going to hook on just like that, minus the overlap. So these are going to be welded edge to edge. Okay, so you can see we've got one 45-degree angle to cut, and we've got a second 45-degree angle to cut. So what we're going to do is we're going to go with the same method that we did with an earlier piece. I'm going to measure 1 inch down. Leave a little mark. Come over. One inch again. Now I'm going to go ahead and connect the two dots. Alright, so that's one. You can kind of see the line. There we go. So you can see my line. Now let's go ahead and do the same over here. Alright, so now I've got this 1-inch square drawn and I've got that 1-inch square drawn. So now the easiest way to do this without forgetting which side we've cut at what degree, you can go ahead and just, you know, line these up. And so you can see from this corner to that corner, and you can see from this corner to this corner. And then we can go ahead and grab our ruler and finish up these lines. Alright, that's one. And that's two. So now we're just going to double check again one more time, because it doesn't hurt to do this multiple times. And then my paint pen is running out, so whichever piece that we're going to end up cutting off, let's just go ahead and shade that in so that way we remember. I've had students sometimes shear or cut off one side and then cut off this side going this way, and then they come up to me and they say, Jose, what am I supposed to do? And really the only thing there is left to do is either hope you've got more material to cut another one, or you've got to make this a lot shorter, and instead of being placed about right here, it's actually going to be placed further down because I have to cut more material out just to make it right. So again, you want to measure twice, that way you only have to cut once. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead, get these corners cut off, and we'll be right back. So we're going to take this equation, we're going to take a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So you might remember this formula from a long time ago. And in place of a and b, we are going to write in the length of the legs on the inside. Okay? So we wouldn't do the outside because that's going to give us a wrong measurement. That's assuming that the rib would connect to the outside of these pieces, but the rib is connecting to the inside, so we need to take the length of the inside of the leg. So if we know that we come down 1 inch and we know that these pieces are 1 inch thick each, well, we can go ahead and remove 1 inch and remove this inch. 7 minus 2 equals 5. Okay, that's a bit of the long way to do it. Another way you can do it is just take your ruler, line it up against the leg, and just count 1 inch all the way down to 5, and you could figure it out like that. 2 ways to accomplish the same problem. So like I said, we're going to go with a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and in place of a and b, we're going to write 5. So it's going to be 5 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. Now I'm not going to do all the math for you, okay? I can't make this too easy for you. I got to make it just a little difficult. So once you figure out what 5 squared plus 5 squared is, we're going to call that x. Okay, so we're going to jump down and we're going to call this x equals c squared. Now we need to simplify this. We can't leave it like this and assume that this is going to give us the correct length. So we need to break it down or simplify it even further. And so let me rewrite it real quick. So in order to eliminate this exponent, we're going to write it as c equals the square root of x. Okay? So then whatever that gives us for c, that is going to be the length that our rib needs to be in order to connect to the 2 legs. Now, if we look at your blueprint and you notice that the rib is supposed to be 1 inch in width, that you can kind of use that to figure out just how long the inside of your rib needs to be. But if you just make a 1 inch strip, roughly the length of whatever C is, and you make sure that you get your 45-degree cuts on each side, it should fit together very nicely. You might have to grind down those sharp edges just to make sure the fit up is spot on, but that's pretty much it.